So here's the thing, I was already planning on doing a video all about the Nintendo Switch 1 now that the Switch 2 is out. However, the Nintendo decided to throw a wrench into the plans, some might say, by raising the entire family of consoles prices across the board. The Switch OLED is now only $50 less than a Switch 2. What does this mean for the continuation of support for the Nintendo Switch 1? Well, here's the thing, no one really knows. You would think if anything the stock price would be a fan of increasing console prices, but it wasn't, and a lot of people are just kind of slapping the blanket label that it'll be, oh yeah, sunsetted kinda like the 3DS. But these situations are not comparable at all. The Switch 1 is far more backwards compatible with the Switch 2 than the 3DS, like there's no barrier there. And the Switch 1 sold double the amount of units of the 3DS and has a historically active player base still buying software to back it up. We are in uncharted territory in the transition between consoles for Nintendo. But what's gonna happen? Well, by using what Nintendo has directly verbally said and also what they've indirectly shown through their actions, I have a pretty good guess, so let's jump right into it. We need to start off with the motive. Why are they increasing the prices? The Switch 2 just launched, and I think the general consensus is it's decently better than the Switch 1. So even though it doesn't have an OLED screen, I feel like you're out of your mind if you don't pay $50 more for a Switch 2. Nintendo is bringing the prices of the consoles closer together in the same way they're just bringing the consoles closer together. This is just the next move in a consistent effort from Nintendo to make the Switch 1 more in line with the Switch 2. They added countless new Switch 2 features back over to Switch 1, while also redesigning the Switch 1 menu more than they had for like the last 7 years of the console's life, once again to make it more in line with the Switch 2. Now that the OLED is only $50 cheaper than the Switch 2, it's clear they're creating a platform, an ecosystem, and that's because I believe we will see Nintendo Switch 1 get first-party support until minimum 2027. First things first, Nintendo has often touted out this whole 10-year plan thing, where they've said from pretty early on in the Switch's life, they envisioned the console having a 10-year life cycle. In 2022, which was already year 6 for the Nintendo Switch, the president of Nintendo mentioned they're still in the middle of its life cycle. More importantly, what is Nintendo doing right now that makes me think the Switch 1 is going to get more titles? Well, they just came out and said that they're going to be using shorter development times, which likely means the release of more smaller games, maybe those more niche Nintendo franchises or more like $40 offerings from them. This directly incentivizes the developers to use Nintendo Switch 1 as the base, and then maybe just add a Nintendo Switch 2 edition on top. If you're already making a game that is somewhat smaller in scope, why stop selling to the most successful console in the modern day? A console that has notoriously been extremely accepting of smaller experiences, specifically through like indie games. I am absolutely loving my Nintendo Switch 2 so far, and a big reason for that is that the first 2 games are for my 2 favorite Nintendo franchises. However, in each one's respective Ask the Developer interview, they were very transparent in letting us know that both of these titles started off on the Nintendo Switch 1. Bonanza and Mario Kart World are both games that clearly, at least in the developer's mind, were not possible at all on the Switch 1. This is obviously a marketing strategy to show off the console that one of its main draws is just its raw power compared to the Switch 1, but like we don't need that raw power for something like Tomodachi Life. Development of these games were started years ago, but moved to the Switch 2 because the core concepts of the gameplay necessitated it. There are clearly other games, kinda like a Tomodachi Life, that did not necessitate being on Switch 2. Jumping back to this whole 10-year plan, which I firmly believe Nintendo intends to stick to, this would take us into early 2027 at the end of the 10-year mark. They'd be supporting the Switch 1 for about 2 years after the Switch 2, and that's on par with the timeline for the 3DS. However, this is where I just have to say the Switch is fundamentally different from the 3DS. First of all, the Switch sold over 2 times as many units and it has an attach rate over 3 times higher. Beyond that though, there are some structural changes here. The introduction of cross-buy between generations, and most importantly, Nintendo Switch 2 editions allow them to also benefit the Switch 2, whereas a 3DS game wasn't able to benefit the Switch at all. Because of that, I would not be surprised at all if the Nintendo Switch 1 is a pretty major focus for them going forward. For example, this year has been the launch of a new console, and Switch 1 still has Metroid Prime 4 and a Pokemon game due out. I'm excited to play one of these, but I'm going to get the Nintendo Switch 2 edition simply because Retro already made the best looking game on Switch 1. Can I say that yet? Is Prime, like, do Do we all agree that? It looks so good, and I'm waiting for that to get a Switch 2 edition too, because it's a little muddy just because of the Switch 1, but man, it would look ridiculous. Are we ever gonna get that Metroid Prime 2 and 3 HD remastered? This is a tangent, but like, is that ever coming? I thought people were saying that was like an actual thing, and now it's just never existed. Anyway, all this to say, I'm excited for Prime 4's Switch 2 edition, because if anyone has shown they can take full advantage of these consoles, especially in kind of a remaster setting, it is retro. However, here's the thing. Switch 2 editions buy Nintendo a bit of time to keep supporting Switch 1 while also benefiting Switch 2, but if Prime 4 somehow came out like 2 or 3 years from now, I would definitely be wishing it was built ground up for Switch 2. Again, the Switch 2's amazing first 2 games are on the Switch 2 because their ideas were so big they wouldn't work on Switch 1. No matter how good the graphics are, you can't get that quality level out of a Switch 2 edition. It's just fundamentally not possible because the game would need to be changed entirely. And this all leads into my opinion on the matter. Is it actually good? If I truly think Nintendo is going to keep supporting Switch 1 until after its 10-year mark, meaning I think it'll truly taper off at like the end of 2027, is that a good thing for Switch 2? It all depends on if we start to see games built from the ground up for Switch 2. Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Kart World needed the power of the Switch 2, but they needed that for their gimmicks. Hyrule Warriors is coming out, but that just needs the power to run normally. But I guess that still makes it a good showcase of the Switch 2's power, because it won't look like a slideshow now, hopefully. Please, come on. And I'm talking about big games here. Yes, Drag X Drive or like Switch Welcome Tour, I'm not really talking about those. I'm talking about big Nintendo games that you can truly feel were conceptualized with this console in mind. My most anticipated game in terms of something that will truly feel like a ground-up revolution for the system is Kirby Air Riders, and it's not even close. In fact, for all my Kirby Air Ride fans, if y'all remember Top Ride, that weird like top-down side mode you probably played once, I bet Sakurai's gonna do something like that with mouse mode. That's my stab in the dark prediction, but I had to get it out somewhere in a video because like I really do think that's gonna happen. I don't know why. I guess it's just because, especially when he's not making a Smash Bros game, Sakurai does such a good job at showing off core features for the console, like Kid Icarus Uprising making an incredible use of the 3D gimmick and the touchscreen in the controls. It demonstrates the console's features so well, and I would be shocked if Kirby Air Ride didn't do the same thing, so that's why I'm throwing my hat in the ring with the Top Ride guess. Back to Kid Icarus Uprising though, that's honestly another game that would feel built ground up for Switch 2 if they incorporated mouse mode right, because the visuals in that game were amazing, but they just were so hampered by the 3DS. There were so many spectacle set pieces that deserve 1080p 60 or even 4K, like they just gotta be brought over. So that's kind of my take. We need games that are built ground up for Switch 2, but I don't think Nintendo's not gonna give us that. I just think that they're getting ready to load up on a decent amount of smaller scale Switch 1 games because, well, they've pretty much come out and said just that. They want the console to last for a couple more years to hit that 10-year mark. In year 6, we were still in the middle of the console's life cycle. They've announced that they're gonna be making smaller games with shorter development times, and they've created a full ecosystem that still encourages you to buy the Switch 2 because the price increases are so bizarre. But if you have a Switch 1 like so many people do, there's still going to be games coming out for you to buy. They just won't have the Switch 2 edition features. On the Switch 2 side, people will have the option to buy the game normally like it's on Switch 1, pay a little bit more for an upgrade visually, or if you only want to play those big Switch 2 hallmark experiences like Mario Kart World or a Donkey Kong Bonanza or hopefully a Kirby Air Riders, then you can just stick to that, as long as Nintendo doesn't go too far in onto the Switch 1 route, but I don't think they will. They have to understand that their brand new console needs these big games. We're getting a new Splatoon game, we're getting Hyrule Warriors, there's stuff coming, but I don't know, even with the price increase of the Switch 1, my take is that Switch 1 is still going to be getting like its own segments and directs and stuff for another couple years. Now I want to have a little fun with it. If I think the Nintendo Switch 1 is going to be getting games built for that system in particular until maybe the end of 2027, what could they possibly do? It's probably not going to get anything that big, right? Well, Tomodachi Life is a great example of something that is a big game. People forget the original Tomodachi Life did insanely well on the 3DS. This is going to capture a piece of that Animal Crossing pie and sell really well as a result. But it's also not a crazy lift on the development side, so that's kind of the mindset I went into this with. And that leads into remasters. Yeah, it's no secret, the Switch 1 is probably going to be getting its fair share of remasters. I mean, we've already been getting a ton, but they've been very odd remasters, like Luigi's Mansion 2 HD or Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. There are multiple slam dunk easy remasters they haven't done yet, and I wonder if it's finally time for something like a Twilight Princess HD or Wind Waker HD. Maybe we get them both in one pack, probably not, but those are by far the biggest slam dunk no-brainer Wii U ports we have left. However, that hasn't bothered Nintendo. They've been double dipping into the 3DS as well with stuff like Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, which makes me think, okay, if they're gonna port a Luigi's Mansion game from the 3DS, a 3D Land HD with multiplayer would not need the power of the Switch 2. That could very easily be a Switch 1 game, and that would sell incredibly well. The last remaster I have to mention is Kirby Planet Robobot. I feel like that's just kind of bound to happen. The 3DS ended with a Kirby remaster. I feel like the Switch probably will have one more in its tank. Moving on to just other smaller experiences, I could see something like a Pilot Wings or a Punch-Out. They're not gonna sell incredibly well, but it's just one more franchise that Nintendo can say they got on the Nintendo Switch, and now with backwards compatibility, the Switch 2 family of systems. Neither would be subject to that much of an insane development cycle, and therefore they just seem to lend better to the style of Switch 1 games that Nintendo has kind of come out and said they're gonna make. These two I don't think are gonna happen, but I would love to see a 2D Wario Land game. That would be awesome, and honestly even cooler, I would be so down for a new Mario Pinball Land. Imagine if they gave Mario Pinball like the Mario vs. Donkey Kong treatment, so it looks stunning and they just add in tons of new puzzles. We're past the days of looking for a system seller. I'm just trying to think of fun experiences that I would personally enjoy, and it feels like they could get some cool mileage out of that. If we want to get really crazy with it, it's about to be like 5 years since Metroid Dread. Nintendo put Samus Returns out after the Switch 1 already released. I don't think a 2D Metroid is entirely out of the question, especially if it's a remake like a Super Metroid HD something. This has quickly gone to more of a wish list, but hey, I can't help it. I feel like the idea of smaller developed games is more alluring to me personally. I kind of like the more tight and compact experiences. But anyway, those are the games I think we might see and kind of that I want to see on the Switch 1, and how long I think the games will continue coming out for the Switch 1. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. It was a fun one to make. I know a lot of you guys probably don't have the Switch 2 yet, and don't worry, when Nintendo puts out Switch 1 news, we will still be there covering it. Thank y'all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out my review of Donkey Kong Bonanza. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.